Thank you everyone for joining the Cyber Threat Intelligence Plan and Proposal for Rivian by Travis Vance. We're going to step you through tonight giving a industry briefing, the need for cyber threat intelligence, the return on the investments. What are the potential threats against the industry? Who's attacking the industry? How are they getting in and attacking companies in the organization in the automobile making space? What lessons can we learn from previous attacks from other companies? And what recommendations we have for Rivian. As we know, the U.S. automobile industry is worth $82.6 billion as of 2021. Typically, we see a range between $16 and $18 billion are spent on research and product development. As Rivian, we're one of the fastest growing emerging engineering in the self-driving electric field space, which is highly valuable for other organizations in the space. As we can see here that the FBI has noted that this industry is highly targeted for cyber attacks and cyber espionage. We can see that more than 60% of vehicles are connected to the internet, and there's new technologies being placed in vehicles that can lead to opportunities of hacking. You may ask, why do we need cyber threat intelligence? Well, as I mentioned before, we need to protect the crown jewels, and this is behind the vast amount of money spent on research and development. And with Rivian, where we're focusing on that electric and self-driving. But we also, as an organization, have a duty to protect our customers' data and the financial data as well. Just like any other industry, such as banking or cosmetics, there are bodies of regulations in place. The U.S. automobile industries continue to be targeted, as we mentioned before, and we'll get into who's attacking in a few slides from now. There's always an uptick in cyber attacks. Attackers are getting smarter. The vectors, the avenues, how they're getting in. Corporate espionage activities. And then lastly, cyber regulatory requirements are increasing in the US. We can see this with CCPA in California. In Europe, we have the GDPR. So there is definitely a need to be ahead of the game than behind. Now you may ask, why should we care? Why should we spend the money? We can see here that data breaches rose from 3.86 million to 4.24 million, which is the highest average total cost in the history of the Pomon report. 20% of shared breaches initially caused by compromised credentials, which we'll get into with our case studies. Further, it took an average of 287 days to identify and contain a data breach. And it's to note that the longer it took to identify and contain the breach, the more costly it was to an organization. C-suites and boards are increasingly involved in security decisions, and that's why we're speaking with you today. And the study shows that they're doubling down on security investments, where they believe almost a double in spend for 458 billion in 2025 from what we're seeing in 2021 with $262 billion being spent. However, there are tools and methods to prevent these breaches from occurring, and a simple solution is implementing an ERP system, endpoint protection, and one tool is CrowdStrike Falcon, which is noted through the Forrester report that can deliver over a 300% return on investment. Now you may be asking, who's attacking this industry and their intentions? As we can see noted here, there's 4 major players, 4 nations, hackers, competitors, and insider threats. Foreign nations are always attacking the US, especially in this manufacturer business of cars. Being Rivian a US-based manufacturer, we're a prime target for foreign car manufacturers for our technologies and research, so they don't have to spend their own money and get a competitive edge. Hackers, due to the sensitivity and monetary spending behind all this data and research, rogue hackers could be attacking us, trying to steal our data, selling on the black market, or means of ransomware. And we'll get into ransomware attacks in a few slides from now. Competitors, it doesn't have to be just foreign nations, but our direct competitors here in the US. Being such a competitive field and market, direct competitors could be trying to stealing our engineer data to gain a competitive edge over Rivian. And the last threat that most organizations face, and we can see on the chart on the right, is the threat of the insider attack. Malicious insiders are knowingly and intentionally stealing data and exfiltrating valuable data such as IP, personal identifiable information, or even financial data, depending on their role here in the organization. Now, that might be surprising that 60% of insider threat is the cause of breaches, but you have to think as they have more access to this data can make them more prone to stealing and taking it outside the network. Now, how are they attacking? What are the attack vectors? As we can see from IBM and FBI's Crime Complaint Center, most attacks are occurring from phishing and vishing attacks. This is where somebody's spoofing an email or pretending there's somebody in the organization to get access or steal credentials to move around the network to look for sensitive data. Brute force is where somebody can get, credentials or try to guess passwords, password testing and cracking. And ransomware attacks where somebody will get into the network, deploy malware, viruses, and encrypt the network unless you pay a ransom to get a key to unlock it by paying the bounty. And a few quick lessons learned here. We see on the left-hand side target, the Colonial Pipeline being two prime examples that hit the news recently. The Target breach wasn't actually Target that was breached initially. It was their third party who ran an HVAC refrigeration company who was exploited and ended up having network access where the payload malware was placed on terminals that ran malware and sent back credit card data to the hackers, and ended up costing Target millions of dollars, having their stock prices just drop and bad public image throughout the year that occurred. The Colonial Pipeline was a compromised password, just a single compromised password, and the report is they're assuming it's through a phishing campaign, and this was the largest pipe, and that pipeline carried the most gasoline production in the US East, causing shortages because the company ended up having to shut down because that compromised password allowed the hackers to deploy ransomware on the systems, and it was the largest payment for a ransomware cyber attack in the US, and that was up to $4 million. Luckily, the FBI was able to retrieve about half of that back. So with this being said, there are a few recommendations we do want to state out there. Is first, we can see that performing exercises, continuously assessing and resetting your cyber program will allow you to get ahead of your governance, making sure it's fresh, up to date on the latest threats and vulnerabilities. You want to risk prioritize your assets. This allows you to focus on what systems matter the most. You want to initiate retainers with outside parties to help in case there is a breach. Like I said, build a cyber-wide program, implementing tools such as FireEye on the network, CrowdStrike, as I mentioned earlier, implementing a security operations center so alerting is sent to a 24 by 365, 7 days a week staff to allow on alerting, implementing backups throughout the environment just in case there is a threat of cyber. But to really recap, it's less costly to an organization to prevent an attack than reacting and remediating and containing one. With that, thank you for your time. Please let me know if you have any questions.